Welcome to our fourth week of exploring COVID through the lens of faith. When we introduced this journey about a month ago, I shared that COVID continues to be examined by all different facets of our life together. However, there's just little public discourse in terms of looking at COVID through the lens of faith, and that's what we've tried to do. Is we've looked at three conditions that we experience together. First, we looked at depersonalization. Then we looked at the darkness that we all experienced all over the earth. Then we looked at the condition of bewilderment. Well, this week we're shifting from looking at the conditions that human beings experience together, but now we're looking at an earthquake that occurred. Let's put it this way. The earthquake was the shaking of the foundations of institutional life in our culture. Now that seems a little bit boring, but stick with me, because through the lens of faith, now I've not experienced personally an earthquake or a tremor or two, but I've visited persons who have experienced the earth-shaking event. And in the words of a person who survived the San Francisco earthquake of a generation ago, shared with me his experience in these terms. He said, it was different than I had experienced in the military of front-line combat with the enemy. It was different than going down in a plane crash expecting to die on impact, and he had experienced both of those. To experience the foundation shaking, the foundation of the planet Earth that I'd grown accustomed to depending on every minute of my life, it was different. It was more severe. It was more troubling than any other experience I'd had in life. That's sort of what's happened since February of 2020 in the life of the institutions that all of us have depended upon every minute of our life together. Now, first of all, I wanted to sort of set the stage for this exploration by defining institution as those entities that have been created in our culture for the common good. Let me just identify three of those institutions that we've all depended upon in our life together. First, the institutions that deliver medical care to those in need. Secondly, institutions that deliver educational opportunities to learn and grow. And thirdly, institutions which care and nourish for the spiritual dimension of human life. You see, those institutions, medical, educational, and religious, if you will, are all committed to the common good. And they have become the common ground of our life together. And we all depend on these every day of our lives. And the foundation of these institutions have been shaken by the experience of COVID. The earthquake has occurred to these that form our common ground. Now, just taking a quick look at how these institutions have experienced the shaking of their foundations. I asked a staff member a year ago of one of the major medical institutions in the world. At the end of a long day, No other patients were in line to see the doctor. And so I asked him what the experience of COVID had meant to him. And he thought for a minute or so before he responded, and he said, I know now that we were on the brink of closing last year. Now, I'm not talking about a place in Timbuktu. I'm talking about a big outfit. If it had not been for the federal assistance we received, our doors would have been closed. He paused and then said to me, an individual, thank you for paying taxes. Because we're in this thing together. Now that's the shaking of the foundations. All we have to do is look locally at our medical institutions, our religious institutions, our educational institutions. What they are facing is the shaking of the foundations. Let's look at educational institutions. I challenge you to find educational institutions, college, secondary, or primary, whose leaders are willing to be transparent, that has not experienced the shaking of the foundations. I don't think you can find one. Because we have tens of thousands of teachers leaving the profession because they no longer believe that their chosen profession can any longer achieve the goal of healthy and vibrant learning. Now, that's an earthquake. Let's take a look at religious communities in which participation has continued to dwindle and resources to keep the doors open and keep the mission alive for those who are engaged in the nourishment of their spiritual health. No longer there, no longer present. Committed persons leave the mission of God's love untouched. The foundations have been shaken. Now, looking at this shaking of the foundations in the life of our institutions, you can look at that economically, you can look at it politically, you can look at it in terms of the impact on our social systems. But I want to look at it through the lens of faith. For through the lens of faith, we experience the calling on those who believe that there's a spiritual dimension of human life. There is a calling to activate hope. Let me say that again. Through the lens of faith, we look at the earthquake, the shaking of the foundation, and we experience the call to activate hope. What I mean by activating hope is that hope is more than a dream. Hope is more than an idea. For hope involves action. And the action needed today in the face of the daunting realities of COVID for persons of faith, we must put our shoulders of persistent strength behind every effort that emerges for the sake of the common good. And often that common good is represented in our medical, educational, and religious institutions. You see, these institutions were not founded by the state. Who started education in the United States? Not the state, but the church. Who started medical institutions? Not the state, but the church. Who started religious institutions, not the state, as occurred in many countries of the world. No, but the church became institutional. See, that's the history of our culture. Persons of faith putting their shoulder to the wheel for the common good, and that means creating institutions that can serve all. And these institutions become the common ground, the earth of our existence together. What is for the common good must be the work of the faithful few, giving voice to those who have no voice, going to rallies at the state capitol to urge for the common good. Indeed, whatever is for the common good, that's the agenda of the church and faithful people. I learned the importance of activating hope in visiting a member of the president's cabinet in Angola. He was a faithful Muslim man, the minister of culture in Angola. He began to cry in the midst of our conversation. He cried as he expressed thanks to me, a United Methodist bishop visiting his land. And he said, this is my first opportunity I've had to thank someone from the United Methodist Church. And I said, why do you want to thank me? And he said, many churches came to Angola to save souls. But the United Methodist Church came to save lives and save souls. And I said, what does that look like? And he said, every school we have, every hospital we have was started by United Methodist missionaries coming to save lives as well as saving souls. That, you see, is the common good. That is the faithful doing everything we can for the sake of all, not a chosen few. We sing this faith often and don't pay a lot of attention to it. 581, the title of the hymn is Lord, whose love through humble service. And listen to verse 4. Called by worship to your service, forth in your dear name we go, to the child, to the youth, and the aged. Love in living deeds to show, hope and health, goodwill and comfort, counsel, aid, and peace we give, that in your servants, Lord, in freedom, may your mercy know and live. That's activating hope. That's putting our shoulder to the wheel of the common good. And that must be the call that the faithful receive as we look at COVID through the lens of faith. A lot there. But for our thought and conversation, I have a couple of questions. First, what are your stories personally of activating hope or observing others' activation of hope for the common good in the face of the pandemic? Secondly, what are your observations of the shaking of the foundation of the institutions in your neighborhood, state, or nation? Thanks for being a part of our journey.